So good to be with you today. Thanks for having me. Thanks to Frank Kiker for inviting me. I noticed he had the good sense to be in Portugal instead of being here when I was actually speaking. But it's great to see my friend Rep Turner here, who I haven't seen in a number of years, and we got a chance to catch up. I'm so impressed with the service work that you do that I just heard about, and I know also from some folks at Queens who are in Rotary. Our motto at Queens is not to be served, but to serve. And so I really admire what you do there. I hope I'll be able to keep you awake for the next 20 minutes. That little dessert was delicious. And if you're as comfortable as I, you might be sleepy just a little bit. As Claudette mentioned, one of my interests is the philosophy of religion. Now I realize religion can be a sensitive topic of discussion. As illustrated by the time the Baptists and the Methodists were talking about infant baptism. The Baptists started off saying, "Do you mean to tell me you really believe in infant baptism?" The Methodist said, "Believe in it? Hell, I've seen it." So we're going to treat it with this sensitive religion. I'm a product of a mixed family, a mixed marriage. My mother was Methodist and my father was Baptist. And they never gave up either one of them at church. And so I used to like to say to my father, I said, "Dad, there's really no difference between a Baptist and a Methodist. A Methodist is just a Baptist that knows how to read." He enjoyed that and usually put me in a headlock. So, as Claudette said, my topic is college students and religion today. My thesis here is that students are part of a movement in the world from religion to spirituality, or as Harvey Cox argues, from doctrines and creeds to the spirit. And like any social change that happens, there'll be both positive and negative aspects to this change. And this is, of course, a trend, a statistical change. It's certainly not the case that all young people have changed. But the change are interesting, and I want to tell you a little bit about it. And I hope I have a few minutes for discussion afterwards. To get an idea of this change, I'd like to talk about two freshman classes. One, the past year at Queens, and the other, my freshman class at Davidson, back in the dim mist of history. In 1966, my freshman year at Davidson, my class was all male, predominantly from the South, and predominantly white. I believe there were 2 African American students in the entire student body. To the best of my knowledge, there were no Hispanic or Asian students at Davidson at the time. And at Queens in 1966, the story was the same, except that they were all white female. As an aside, I have to mention that Queens has an outstanding international education program. We're number 2 in the nation, and the percent of our students that do international studies, about 90%, 9 out of 10. So as part of that, I traveled with Queens students twice to Italy with 20 Queens women. And one of my Davidson classmates wrote me and said, "You're living the Davidson dream." He said, "Now you're all going to be their grandfather." So thank you for that reminder. Contrast that 1966 class at Davidson, the class I taught with Queens last fall. I'm talking about last fall because we've got a whole semester I can talk about there. In that class at Queens, of 20 students, 5 are male, 7 are African American, and 5 had an international connection. Students who come from China, Japan, Belize, Vietnam, and Nigeria. In that class, among other things, we discussed Homer's Iliad, Socrates, the Hebrew Scriptures, and the New Testament, using this translation called The Message. Here's what I observed in our discussion of religion. There were a few devout Christian students. Most did not have a deep understanding of the Bible, nor did I, as when I went to Davidson. A student who has one Jewish parent, another parent who's uninterested in religion. This student was interested in Buddhism in high school, in junior high school. And when she shared that with her classmates said to her, "Why don't you go back to Afghanistan?" She's still very interested in Buddhism. A very bright, young African-American male who tends to equate Christianity with fundamentalism and judgmentalism. A young male from China who knows nothing about Christianity and really little about Buddhism. "My family's not religious," he says. He came one night to hear me talk about snake handling in Appalachia and religious services. There's no telling what that did to his view of Christianity. An African-American female who sings in Queen's gospel choir. A young woman from Japan who knows nothing about Buddhism or Shintoism or Christianity, but becomes very interested in the stories in the Hebrew scriptures we read. And the son of a Vietnamese parents who's been educated in this country as a fundamentalist Christian. One last, the son of a Presbyterian minister, a son who seems to know every biblical allusion but can speak about it and teach the class better than I can. The discussion in this class about religion was incredibly rich. We definitely had more than one understanding of religion and interest in more than one religion. The class, I think, is a microcosm of the world in which we now live. The lesson for me about that class is that if students are given the opportunity to speak about religion openly, quite a number are very interested. The openness and possibility of philosophically examining, of critically thinking about their religion is something they're open to, especially if they've experienced either nothing or a Sunday school class, say, where different beliefs were discouraged subtly or maybe even openly. And they also exhibit the 4 trends I'd like to talk about in this talk. And as I say, these are statistical trends. I think there's really something to them, but it doesn't mean everyone is this way. The first trend is that students today are less traditionally religious than older Americans were at the same point in their lives. And this may be no surprise to you. But many of the college students I teach today have never attended church or synagogue on a regular basis, and many have no knowledge of the Bible whatsoever. When we begin this unit, they write a biblical autobiography. This is about their experience in the Bible, their attitudes. One student's story is very telling. He says, the only time I've ever seen the Bible was one night when my family spent the night in a hotel room. I saw the Bible there. So this trend that they're less traditionally religious is shown by a poll by the Pew Forum on Religion, which finds that by some measures, young adults are very less religious than older Americans. Fewer young adults belong to any particular faith than older people do today. They're also less likely to be affiliated than their parents and grandparents were at a similar point in their lives. And I think this is the relevant statistic. So to compare 4 generations, think about these generations in their late 20s and how many are unaffiliated with the religion. So the pollsters have to give names to these generations, right? So the greatest generation, the ones born before 1928, when in their late 20s, 6% were unaffiliated with religion. The silent generation born from 28 to 45, at a comparable point, 13% of them were unaffiliated with religion. So it went from 6% to 13%. The boomer generation, my generation, and Red's generation, at that point, 13%, well, I skipped a generation there, I think. I think that was us, that was 13%, sorry. Gen X, those born between 68 and 80, 20% in their late 20s were unaffiliated. And the millennials, the current generation, 26 were unaffiliated. So in 4 generations, it's gone from 6% to 13% to 20% to 26% unaffiliated with religion. But in other ways, these millennials remain fairly traditional in their religious beliefs and practices. For example, their beliefs about life after death and the existence of heaven, hell, and miracles closely resembles the belief of older people today. And to try to talk about these next 3 trends, I want to give you an example that's a little story, partly true, partly imagined. I'm a member of the YMCA, which stands for the, as you know, the Young Men's Christian Association. I go, well, they're not all young because I go there. And well, they're not all men either, come to think of it. I mean, it's gender open now. And the young men, well, they're not all Christian either, I think. Certainly, if you heard some of the language on some of the athletic course, you wouldn't think of that. Well, to come to think of it, people always got these earphones in, so there's not much associating going on either. Maybe that's why they changed the name to a Y. But it's a great place. So recently I was walking into the Y on a Sunday about 12:45, and I was following a well-dressed young woman about 30 years of age. She was wearing a colorful blouse, black slacks, high heels, and was walking very quickly and purposefully into the Y. Now I imagine, to illustrate these trends, I imagine she's come from a large, non-denominational church named something like The Gathering. She never liked going to church, but going to this church one day with a friend, she had a powerful religious experience which brought her to tears. Right now, she's going to a yoga class at the Y, where the participants will fold their hands together and bow to one another and say, the light within me recognizes the light within you, honors the light within you. That story illustrates the next three trends 2 through 4. The first one is that today's college students and recent graduates have a great thirst for meaning in their lives, for spiritual experience. The third trend, a growing number of young Americans and young people and Americans practice more than one religion. The fourth trend is that a growing number of Americans and young people say they've had a religious or spiritual experience or spiritual awakening. Let me give you a little bit about each of those trends. The second one, a growing number have a great thirst for meaning in their lives. UCLA does a study in their higher education institute, a longitudinal study, to assess the spirituality of college students during their undergraduate years. What they find is that while attendance at religious services decreases dramatically for most students between their freshman and junior years, the students' overall level of spirituality increases. And this is a study of 15,000 college students over quite a number of years. They try to measure values, beliefs, and attitudes. For example, something they call compassion and self-concept, the extent to which the person sees himself or herself as a compassionate person. They look and see whether they do service work like you do. They have a direct measure they call spirituality, the extent to which they see themselves and others in spiritual terms. So, at freshmen, 44% of students attend church frequently. By the time they're juniors, that drops to 25%. I'm teaching, what you find when you teach college these days is that these students who have to go to high school classes at 7:30, by the time they're halfway through their freshman year, 10 o'clock is really early for a class. They're on a very different schedule than we are. But, so freshmen who say attaining inner harmony in their lives is important. It's at 48% of freshmen, goes up to 62% for juniors. Those who say integrating spirituality in my life is important, that's 42% for freshmen, goes up to 50% for juniors, and there's some other attitudes there. So while they're going to church less, they're also showing a greater increase in spirituality. And to a degree, that goes along with the next trend, that a growing number of Americans and young people practice more than one religion. Another poll by the Pew Research Center finds that large numbers of Americans engage in multiple religious practices, mixing elements of diverse traditions. Many say they attend worship services of more than one faith or denomination. For example, forget about special events like weddings and funerals where you might go to a service in someone's other religion. Forget those. Aside from that, 30% of Protestants say they attend services outside their own denomination, and 20% of Catholics say they sometimes attend non-Catholic services. Which reminds me of the story of Bubba, who Bubba was born up in Silva, way in the western part of the state, and his family then moved into Asheville, in the suburbs of Asheville. And if you know the Asheville area, there are a lot of folks who settled there from the Northeast, as the North Carolina in general, and everything went fine for Bubba and his neighbors, except when it came to be Lent one year, most of the neighbors were Catholic, had come down. And so on Friday nights, early in Lent, Bubba, every night he cooked a big steak. And so the Catholics who were observing Lent weren't eating meat on Friday. And so they went to the pastor and said, what can we do? This is really bothering us. And so Father O'Reilly went to talk to Bubba, and he decided he was going to convert Bubba to Catholicism. So they had a lot of talks and meetings, and they met, and finally Bubba agreed to become Catholic. And so the father took some holy water, and he sprinkled it over Bubba's head and said, you were born Baptist, you were raised Baptist, but now you were Catholic. So Father O'Reilly felt very good he solved this problem. Come the next Friday night, he gets a call from one of his parishioners and saying he's doing it again. He's out grilling steak again on Friday night. So the father rushed over there. He saw Bubba standing at the grill, and Bubba had taken some water out of a little thing, and he was holding the water over the steak, and he says, you was raised a cow, you was born a cow, but now you is catfish. So sometimes this plurality of religions can cause a little bit of confusion. We are statistically an overwhelming U.S. Christian country, but significant minorities profess belief in a variety of Eastern and New Age beliefs. For example, 24% of the public overall and 22% of Christians say they believe in reincarnation, that people would be reborn in this world again and again. That's a distinctly Eastern belief. In Queens, at the Department of Philosophy and Religion, more students sign up for world religions than any other single course we have, even more than my course in ancient philosophy, I'm sorry to say. But there's a great hunger about those religions. And we have a number of other courses that take off on that, including Islam and Buddhism and Hinduism. So that's the third trend. The fourth trend is that a growing number of Americans and young people say they've had a religious or mystical experience, or religious or spiritual awakening. Maybe we're in the midst of another great awakening. Half of all Americans say they've had a religious or mystical experience among those spiritual awakening. In 1962, only 22% of Americans reported having such an experience, which grew to about 33% in 1994 and now 50%. That's a significant trend that's going on. Differences among Protestants are striking. 70% of white evangelicals and African American Protestants say they've had religious or mystical experiences, compared with 40% of mainline or old line Protestants, if you want to have it, and Catholics. But the interest in religious experiences definitely had an influence on mainline Christianity as well, where many now offer yoga classes and meditation in the form of centering prayer, as well as more informal services that may be more spirit-filled than other services. When I taught the philosophy of religion in a class recently, one of the most interesting students was the daughter of a Jewish father and a Native American mother, the mother who somewhat in secret practiced her indigenous Native American religion. The daughter didn't find this out until she was in her teens. And the daughter, who's, I guess in her 30s now, she herself is a practitioner of healing touch massage, and says she's able to envision what's going on spiritually and emotionally with someone by touching them. So I said, please don't touch me. And she was very interested in the class, the doctrine of William James' chapter on mysticism. All four of these trends, students are less religious in traditional terms, increasing spirituality among college students, Americans practicing more than one religion, a growing number of people having religious experiences, are in keeping with Harvey Cox's book, The Future of Faith. To quote Cox, religious people today are more interested in ethical guidelines and spiritual disciplines than in doctrines. And with globalization, religion is becoming less regional. When I was growing up, if you wanted to put Hindus on a map, they're all in India. Now, right here in Charlotte, of course, we've got Christians, Jews, Muslims, Buddhists, Hindus, Baha'is. They're all right here in Charlotte. Religion is also less hierarchical, less dogmatic, less patriarchal. At the same time, this is bringing about a reaction from those who might characterize themselves as fundamentalist or sometimes evangelical. And so you see the splits we've had in the presidential campaigns in recent years. So some very brief conclusions. Among my students and young people as a whole, we're seeing openness and deep interest in spirituality, other than the ones in which they were raised. That openness has great potential and a promise of great understanding, or at least reaching common ground. If we know more about people, we appreciate more, and we hate less. A danger in these trends is that our experiences and knowledge will just be shallow, a form of dilettantism. So we're all taking a cafeteria approach to religion, where we take a little bit of this, and a side dish of this, a main dish of that, and we never become fully committed. A related danger is that the experience of multiple religious practices can be confusing. I know what they say in those yoga classes because I attend them. I know that stretching is hard and good for me. And my training is in philosophy and logic. And at times when my teacher waxes philosophical and says, imagine this white cone of protection descending around you, my analytical mind kicks in and says, what nonsense. I hate it when they say stuff like this. And then my non-analytical mind says to my analytical mind, quit trying to analyze everything. You're destroying the opportunity to believe in the now. Haven't you learned anything from meditation? Another danger is that interest in multiple religions requires people to be able to think critically, to be able to separate the wheat from the chaff. In my mind, there's a great deal of difference in being able to draw on the wisdom and deep practices of other religions, such as the experience of God, whether in a Christian service or in a Buddhist meditation. Deep difference between that and using astrology to plan your day, or thinking that you're going to get your energy from a glass triangle. On the other hand, it's good that people have to think critically, rather than have someone think for them. And I do believe deep insights can be gained from looking at all the world's religions. The Hindus might be right that the various religions are just different paths to the top of the same mountain. And finally, I do believe that the heart of religion is religious experiences and compassion, instead of doctrines and creeds. What's happening today is the latest blooming of religion, and I have a strong hope that a wonderful fruit will be brought forward. Thank you very much for listening, and if we have any time for questions, I'm glad to entertain them. Yes, sir.
You seem to make a pretty dramatic distinction between a religious experience and or a spiritual experience. What are the delineating features in each of those experiences?
There's a lot of overlap. I think you could argue. I think the difference is when people talk about it, many people will say, I'm spiritual, meaning that I'm interested in the experience of God and experiences of living a good life, but I'm not interested in organized religion. I don't want to go to a church, like many young people will say, you know, I think people in churches are hypocritical, so we examine that a little bit. But I think that's a big distinction. Does that help you all?
Yes, thank you.
I can't remember the old joke, but it's something like sitting in a church doesn't make you a Christian any more than working in your garage makes you a car. So something like that.
Do the students elaborate what their spiritual experience was? Is there a commonality as far as maybe getting outside of themselves and experiencing something bigger than their confining ego?
That's a great discussion. I think a great question, and I think it varies widely. But I think what we look at in philosophy of religion is whether those things do point to something in specific. And there are a couple of arguments to go. What they all do point to is the word, if you want to use the word that we and James kind of invented, in the 12-step programs that take on a higher power. There's something greater than us. And I think the other thing is that realizing that it's something greater than us means that my ego, myself, as you said, is not the most important thing. And so that what this being wants us to do is to be compassionate toward others. So I think that's what I would say it points to, but many, many different experiences. So Bertrand Russell, the atheist, who was a well-known atheist, a philosopher who died back in the 1970s at about age 100 years old, he said he would believe in religious miracles, for example. If, for example, a Christian, you know, had the experience of an incarnation of Krishna, instead of something he thought might be societally influenced. But it's so interesting now because Christians can know about Krishna, and so Hindu God, so it's hard to say. Yes, sir.
You know, the explanation for the trend of college graduates, you say, are in the service of into the community, not joining clubs like Rotary or Alliance, any service organization of that type.
I don't know a trend, but I will say among our graduates, we poll our graduates, and about 90% of our students do some service learning along the way. We call it service learning because it's not always volunteer. We say for this course you have to do a service learning opportunity. You do something and you reflect on it. The reflection on it seems to be the key in how much they get out of it. I'm very interested in this thing called positive psychology, which says that psychology, instead of looking at your neuroses and and psychoses ought to at least also be looking at our strengths. And one of the things, surveys that they've done, is that they found that people looking for meaning in life, doing service, greatly increases their experience of having meaning in life. But what's interesting, the difference though, is that folks roughly our age, we're all sorts of ages in here, find that much so than always young students do. They maybe don't get as much out of it. But we find that our college graduates continue to do, Queens, a great deal of service work. So I don't know of any trends unless you were going to share some.
Would you recommend any mechanisms that could be used by service club to entice young people to join their programs?
That's a great idea. Do you still have high school affiliate organizations?
Yeah.
And which is that? That's the
Interact.
Interact. I knew I was in one of those clubs in high school. I think it was the other one. But those things seem to be a really good thing. And I wonder. I mean, I know nothing about this, so I'll speak an idea. But I just wonder, like, whether connecting with some of these folks, you connect with them and doing your service, doing service together, or might be another way to kind of make a connection. Yes, ma'am.
My Presbyterian church this weekend, for the first time, is trying a 1-hour experimental contemporary service to try and draw in more people. What do you think about contemporary services?
It's a great question, a fascinating question. I've been a member of I've attended a number of service of churches in my life. I don't know if there's a direct causal relation. Are you Presbyterian USA? Of course, Queens is also Presbyterian USA. But it seems that every church I attend is losing members in the long term, so maybe I need to do them a favor by not going there anymore. So I've been attending Myers Park Methodist a good bit, where it also has a contemporary service. I think it definitely appeals to young people who are somewhat skeptical often about religion, as they are about politics and a number of things our generation does. But I think to them seems more spontaneous, less tradition-bound, etc. I have a little bit of a, I don't know, it's a little bit jarring for me. How about you?
Well, we're all waiting to see what happens. And who attends.
And who attends. But I do like them in the way I do these talks on stake handlers and in Appalachia, which is a very spirit-filled tradition. There's a great movie, if you want to see a great movie to think about religious experience, go through Netflix or whatever and watch The Apostle with Robert Duvall. You know, this movie came out about 10 years ago. I don't know what his religion is, and I'm not sure he speaks about it. He grew up Christian Scientist, but he's been very interested in the Pentecostals, and this religion is about Pentecostal churches. And I used it with a class recently to try to examine his religious experience, to what degree you might say it was valid and interesting. I know when I grew up, and being a good Southerner, we were told there were two things never to talk about at the dinner table, which was politics and religion, which might have explained how much time we spent talking about the weather. This was endless. Might rain, yep. Then again, might not. So sometimes I think it's good to talk about these things. One of the things I tell my students about college, I say this is a great time to have to talk about these things. College classes should be, I think that's trying to make an environment where you can dig into what you think, share ideas, hear reasons for things, you know, not just putting forth your opinion, but trying to get reasons for it. So anyway, it's a great experience. I don't want to take any more time, but I want to thank you very much for having me here, and I enjoyed talking with you. Thank you.